April 23, 2018. A body had been found off Highway 98. It was a woman lying along beside a ditch, her head pointing one way, her feet pointing the other. Her body was bruised from head to toe and cuts on her face, stomach, and legs. It was brutal overkill. But who could have done this, and most importantly, why? No one knew who she was. But by the next day, they made an ID on her. 31-year-old Aileen Siden, a Miami woman. And the investigator on the case had known her for 25 years. They weren't just acquaintances either, they were close. The last time they talked, Aileen had confided in him, scared out of her mind about something involving her sister. She had pleaded to get out of some mess, but fear kept her trapped. Then a call came in from Sportsman's Lodge Motel. A housekeeper was cleaning up and found blood in one of the rooms. When investigators checked it out, Room 15 turned out to be a slasher horror movie. Furniture was tossed everywhere, some stuff was missing, and the bed? Totally covered in blood. Whatever had gone down in there, it was violent. But what kind of brutality exactly happened in room number 15? Why was Aileen Siden killed and thrown out on the roadside like that? Let's investigate. This all happened in Appalachiola, Florida. This is the quiet little town in Franklin County that people call the Forgotten Coast. Time seems stuck with its old charm, with no high-rises here. But on that April day, all the calmness was shattered when the bruised, dead body of Aileen was discovered by a local couple, Mix Lieutenant Ronnie Jones, who worked for the Franklin County Sheriff's Office at the time. We'll never forget the day they discovered Aileen's body. They also found another crime scene, Room 15 at the Sportsman's Lodge Motel. Blood was splattered everywhere, bed, floor, and walls like a Tarantino movie set. But here's the creepy part. The whole room smelled of vinegar. Sensing someone had tried to clean up the mess, they hadn't done an excellent job. Now they used luminol, and traces of human blood lit up the bathroom. That's when it became obvious the bathroom was where the worst of the attack had taken place. Then came across this shower curtain rod, and it had both blood and a palm print. They tested it, and guess what? Those were Aileen's. That rod was probably used as a weapon. Slowly but surely, the investigators started to understand what happened, who was behind this, and how. But the tragedy didn't end with Aileen's death. Her sister, Francesca Seiden, received the worst news. Together, their family had already lost their mother to cancer and their father due to sickness. But life doesn't have a pause button. Years later, things began settling down again as Francesca moved to Los Angeles and Aileen hit her 20s. She had the space for the first time in her life to reflect on everything she'd lost: her mom, her dad, her childhood. It changed her, made her more thoughtful, more sensitive. Aileen's best friend, for the sake of privacy, we will call her Allie, used to talk about how fiercely independent Aileen was when she lived in Miami. She had a job as a property manager and lived on her own, handling life like a pro. Allie saw this side of her up close when Aileen visited her in LA back in 2016. But when Aileen decided to head back to Miami, Allie wasn't thrilled. She had a bad feeling about it, thinking it might mean Aileen would reconnect with Zach Abel. Zach, or Zachary, was a guy she'd known since high school. At first, Allie wasn't too thrilled about Zach. He didn't sit right with her. But over time, Aileen started dating him, and their relationship took a strange turn pretty quickly. Fast forward to Franklin County, and things took a dark twist. Investigators found Aileen, Zach, and another woman by the name of Christina Araujo in the area of Appalachiola, staying in room 15 at a place called the Sportsman's Lodge. Christina was Zach's girlfriend at that time. Here's where things get a little spooky. 3 people went into that room, but 2 came out and they were carrying a body. You can guess whose body it was. Meanwhile, at Lauderdale, Florida, Captain Mike Picavet sat aboard his 50-foot boat pondering everything that had gone down. He knew Aileen and her boyfriend Zach quite well. He'd met Zach randomly in a bar some years ago. Soon they became friends, and Mike found himself sucked into a world of wild parties and hard drinking, a lifestyle that probably suggested the sinister that was to come. Mike couldn't help but notice the weird power play between Zach and Christina. She was 8 years older than Zach and called all the shots in their relationship. Zach went along with what she said, but you could tell things between them were far from peachy. And then in 2016, Zach introduced Aileen Siden to the scene. That was Mike's very first indication that things between Zach and Christina were way messier than they seemed on the surface. As in, it wasn't exactly a relationship. It was business entangled too. Zach did not want out anymore, but Christina wasn't letting him. She'd get drunk and start throwing threats and manipulative stuff his way, making it almost impossible for him to extricate himself. Now, Aileen. Her entrance into this story was just about as complicated. She and Zach had been secretly seeing each other, with Aileen thinking he was going to leave Christina for her. But Zach? No way he cut ties with Christina. Things only got more intense in 2017 when Aileen lost her job managing properties. That hit her hard financially and emotionally. She's suddenly working for that used car dealership owned by Zach and Christina, which was a huge step back for her. Aileen continued to push Zach to make the breakup official, but Christina was unwilling to let go of him or the power control. When Zach finally tried to get out of it, Christina did something wild. She straight up suggested, hey, what if we all just, make this a thing, like a throuple? Aileen didn't agree at first, but after a few weeks of thinking it over, she also agreed. And that's exactly how the three of them ended up in that unconventional relationship. But here's the thing, maintaining a throuple relationship is never easy. Jealousy, feeling left out, constant drama, it all started creeping in pretty fast. And before long, what might have seemed like a solution to their problems turned into a whole new set of them. Their relationship got extremely messy, especially when the fights started turning physical. The women would go at it, throwing punches, and it was clear by the bruises and black eyes that things were getting rough. They'd sometimes try to cover it up with sunglasses. It was always a mess, mostly because of the alcohol. And it was no secret that Zach was the main troublemaker in all of this. Aileen's best friend Allie saw it all, with Aileen coming to her for help after another beating. But Aileen was scared. She knew Christina had connections in law enforcement and feared that might make things worse if she reported what was happening. Her sister, Francesca, also saw how difficult it was for Aileen to keep away from this toxic situation. Once, Allie had to rush Aileen to the ER after another beating, but Aileen wouldn't tell the doctors where those bruises came from. She was obvious in her denial, but Allie knew it was only going to get worse. She straight up told Aileen that things were dangerous and urged her to break up with Zach before something horrible happened. This all started back in 2018 when Aileen moved in with Zach and Christina, even though their relationship was already falling apart with all the violence. She felt stuck emotionally and financially and honestly thought this was her last shot at making it work. But just a few weeks into them living together, she was done. She made up her mind to leave. But her plan to get out of there was foiled on April 7, 2018, when Zach and Christina got heated again. Aileen took Zach's phone to dial Allie, informing her she was done and would get Zach out of that house. They even booked a small stop at a coffee shop before leaving. But then Christina found out and blew up Allie's phone, threatening to call the cops and report the car they were in stolen just to keep them from leaving. Allie tried to warn them, to tell them to turn back, but Aileen and Zach wouldn't listen. They headed straight for Georgia. During their road trip, Christina was seriously over the top. She bombarded Aileen and Zach with over 150 texts in just 24 hours. A lot of these were threats, one of which said her dad would be calling, and another one where she said there'd be some kind of payback. Even though the tension was through the roof, about 48 hours into the trip, Christina seemed to cool down a bit. She messaged Aileen and Zach, telling them that she loved them and that they should probably just go home. But instead of turning around, Zach invited her to join him in Dallas, and sure enough, they all met up again. But with Christina back, the same old issues started to pop up again, and Aileen was so worked up that she wrote a frantic letter to Allie, saying things were getting worse, and she was seriously afraid someone might get hurt. By day 10 of the road trip, Aileen's older sister, Francesca, was starting to freak out also. She hadn't heard from Aileen for way too long. Then they stopped in New Orleans, and Aileen finally called and told her that she was scared for her life. She had a gut feeling something was seriously wrong. Francesca also wanted her to get help right away, but Aileen cut the call short. After that, the travel continued, with the party ending up in Panama City, Florida. But they drove the wrong way and ended up on this isolated stretch called the Forgotten Coast. The whole vibe was strange. There were moments when they were having fun, but then this heavy, weird feeling settled in. Finally, on April 21, 2018, they arrived in Franklin County, where they proceeded to a local joint called the Red Pirate to play some mini-golf and party. A local at this place suggested that they stay at the Sportsman's Lodge Motel, so they took the last room there, room number 15. The following day, April 22nd, the group decided to stay a bit longer and continue celebrating. Surveillance footage from a liquor store showed them buying a ton of vodka and whiskey, as if they were having some wild party. While everyone else appeared focused on celebrating, Aileen, on the other hand, looked pretty zoned out, like she was just trying to get through the mess she was in. In the afternoon, she opened up to her friend Allie, telling her just how desperate she was to get out of there from everything. She was claustrophobic and felt that there was this heavy veil of fear and control hovering over her, and she couldn't take it anymore. So they made a plan. Allie obtained a bus ticket for Aileen from Tampa to Miami, where she promised to take her in and help her get away. But after the plan was set in motion, Allie never heard from Aileen again, and that's when things got weird enough. That night, hundreds of miles away in Fort Lauderdale, Mike Picave was home alone when there came a knock at the door. It was Christina Araujo and Zach Abel, and they brought some startling news. Christina said Aileen had run away, but Zach revealed she was dead. According to him, it was Christina who was responsible. He stated that when he woke up, he found Aileen lying there unconscious and tried to do CPR, but Christina would not allow him to call 911. Mike was concerned about his friend's safety, but he did not want to run directly to the cops. Instead, Mike called Colonel Tony Araujo, the man that Christina was always flaunting she could solve any problem. He didn't spill everything over the phone. He scheduled a meeting at a gas station instead. The whole time, Christina and Zach were sleeping at Mike's place. Mike took a photo, and when they did meet up, Mike informed the colonel that Christina was somehow related to a murder. The colonel took Mike into the sheriff's office to make a formal statement. Mike spoke of everything he knew to the investigators. Afterward, the cops showed him a photo and he recognized the bruised body of Aileen Siden. That was all the confirmation they needed, and the cops did not waste any time grabbing Christina and Zach at Mike's place as they were about to leave. Both were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. But the case stayed in limbo for almost 6 years, bogged down by legal delays and complications with two defendants. Aileen's sister, Francesca Seiden, had to wait too long for justice. Zach Abel was indicted at the Franklin County Courthouse in Appalachiola, Florida, in January 2024, after being charged with first-degree murder, despite his pleadings of not guilty. The whole affair had started 8 months earlier, with Christina Araujo accepting a plea. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and stated she had been part of the beating of Aileen. Prosecutor Jared Patterson, after reviewing the evidence, firmly blamed Zach for Aileen's death, depending on the jury believing Araujo's account of the events. Araujo took the stand and gave the only first-hand account of what happened that night, April 22, 2018, at the Sportsman's Lodge. She said that she, Zach, and Aileen had drunk throughout the day, and later they just hung around in room number 15. Araujo insisted that Zach became violently aggressive once he was drunk, and that things turned ugly after Aileen said something to her. Aileen had been talking with Araujo when Zach interrupted her, which triggered the tragic incident. Then there was a total mess of conflicting stories of what went down. Both Zach and Araujo claimed their own version of what occurred, blaming each other for starting the violence that resulted in Aileen's death. According to Araujo, it all started with a huge argument. She said Zach snapped, started accusing Aileen of causing trouble, and then attacked her. Araujo even confirmed that she punched Aileen, admitting that she had an outburst of frustration. She stepped out for some time to cool down before she returned to find the situation worsening. She confirmed Zach and Aileen in the bathroom, Zach having something white, poking Aileen with it. Later, the medical examiner found bruises on Aileen's body that resembled markings made by a shower curtain rod, which was later discovered at the scene with Zach's palm print on it and covered in Aileen's blood. According to Araujo, the assault didn't stop near the bed. Zach grabbed a wooden walking stick and started hitting Aileen over and over. The blows were so strong that the stick snapped in half, with pieces scattered all over the hotel room. Later, investigators found another part of the stick in Zach's car, and it had Aileen's DNA on it. Araujo then described a terrifying moment when she saw Zach using the broken stick to sexually assault Aileen. She said she eventually stepped in, putting herself between the two to stop the attack. After all of that, they were all worn out, so they ended up falling asleep in the room. But when Araujo woke up the next morning, she realized Aileen had died from her injuries. She said she only helped cover things up because she was scared of what Zach might do to her, explaining that his violent temper left her too afraid to act any other way. Now, when the trial came, the prosecution seemed to believe Araujo's story, seeing her as someone who was remorseful. But Zach's lawyer, Alex Morris, had a totally different take. He argued that it was actually Araujo who was behind the violence. He suggested that Araujo was jealous of Aileen's relationship with Zach, and that she'd been threatening Aileen for a while, pointing to some pretty nasty texts Araujo sent to Zach before the incident. One of them said something like, "You come near me, ho, I will kill you." Morris painted the picture that it was Araujo's rage, not Zach's, that led to Aileen's death. Morris also pointed to some injuries on Araujo's hands and feet, caught in a photo taken right after the murder, as clear signs she was in on the attack. He said Araujo had played on Zach's fear of her dad to get him involved in the whole mess. He even suggested that Zach's palm prints on the curtain rod were because Araujo told him to move it while they were cleaning up. Then there was footage showing Araujo driving the car after the murder, which seemed to prove she was in control of everything. The physical evidence made things even messier. The medical examiner said Aileen's injuries were so bad, they were like what you'd see in a serious car crash. At the end of the day, the jury had to decide which story they believed. Was Araujo just a scared accomplice, or was she the mastermind driven by jealousy and rage? The evidence was messy, the testimonies were all over the place, and the details of that night were chilling, leaving the jury with a tough choice. Finally, the trial of Zachary Ray Abel wrapped up with a guilty verdict for second-degree murder after a long 5-hour deliberation by the jury. At first, the jury couldn't agree, but eventually, they came to a unanimous decision, holding Zach accountable, just like Christina Araujo, who had already pled guilty to the same charge. Mike Picavey still believed Zach was innocent, but others felt both he and Araujo were equally to blame. But amidst all these, there was still a question: why Aileen had to die in the first place. Some people even whispered about a possible pregnancy. But the autopsy shut that down. When it came time for sentencing, the judge condemned the cruelty of the crime and handed Zach a life sentence without parole. As for Christina Araujo, who had cooperated with investigators and even testified in court, she got 25 years. Her father, Colonel Tony Araujo, stood firm, insisting she face the consequences and refusing to use his position to get her a lighter sentence. But what do you think about this case? Do you think Zach was guilty? Or was it only Araujo who did everything? And most importantly, whoever killed Aileen, what could be the motive? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. And if you want to hear a murder mystery that was too difficult to solve, click on this video. The case was not as violent as this one, but it was almost going to remain unsolved because of its pattern. And if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you soon.